Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a good break. Got a bit of lunch, depending on where you are, a bit of breakfast, because I know we have some of our US colleagues joining us in the next session. Also, I talked to my colleagues Fadia and Helen over the break, and they told us we are seeing questions. I have to check my phone now. We're seeing you all online. We're getting questions from Romania, Canada, Italy, Iran, South Africa, India. So keep the questions coming in the YouTube live chat. We are seeing all of them. I know we're not addressing all of them, but we will go back through and check some of them, and some of us will be in touch with you. This next session, I think very important to us. We're going to focus in on health. Health, I think, is important to all of us, and certainly something that we want to improve. And what we know about behavioral science is that oftentimes we're looking at the difference between intentions and actions. I think we all have very good health intentions, not always great health actions if you look into my personal life. But anyway, that's beside the point. So we're going to start off this session with a keynote with Dr. Mitesh Patel for opening this healthcare and pharma session. Eric, to you.
Yes, just to tell you that I totally disagree with you. For me, I make the right decision for my health. But maybe for some other, it's not the case.
I've had dinner with you. I'm not sure that's always true.
Okay. So I will conduct the interview with Dr. Mitesh Patel and my friend, colleague, and one of our champions within the BVA family regarding the application of behavioral science to this specific sector of healthcare, Suzanne Kirkendall, who is also the CEO of BVA Nudge Consulting, North America.
Great. So let's listen to this conversation with Dr. Mitesh Patel, and then we will have a live roundtable with some people here and Suzanne in the US.
I am honored to introduce our guest speaker for the Healthcare and Pharma session at the Human Advantage Conference. Now, Suzanne Kirkendall, who is the CEO of BVA Nudge Consulting North America and one of the BVA Group champion regarding healthcare, and myself will be speaking with Dr. Mitesh Patel. Mitesh is Vice President for Clinical Transformation and National Lead for Behavioral Insight at Ascension Health, and Dr. Patel was the founding director of the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit from 2016, I think, to 2021. He is a leading expert on using nudges, gamification, and wearables to improve health. He has led more than 25 clinical trials. Maybe we will speak of some of them in partnership with health system, insurers, employers, and community organizations that tested ways to design nudges, incentive, and gamification to change clinician and patient behavior. His work has been published in leading medical journals and has been featured in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, NBC Today, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Forbes, Bloomberg, Time, NPR, and CNN. Welcome, Mitesh. It is really a pleasure, and we are very excited to welcome you at the Human Advantage Conference.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hi, Mitesh. We're really happy to have you. So to start with, could you tell us more about the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit? This was the world's first behavioral design team embedded within a health system, which you created and led up until last year. So what inspired you to start it?
Yeah, as over the last decade, healthcare has really transformed in the way we make decisions. It used to be that clinicians were making decisions on pen and paper or through conversations. And all of that has now become digital through the expansion and adoption of electronic health records. On the patient side, things have also transformed in that, patients in the last 10 years have now all started using smartphones, wearables, other devices, so we can actually get data in new ways from them. And they're starting to engage more in things like telemedicine and patient portals. And those two changes, clinicians now adopting electronic health records, patients using connected devices, mean kind of two major things. One is that the our opportunity to understand what decisions or behaviors are happening has changed. We can see what doctors have prescribed at the individual level. We can zoom out to an entire health system or insurance program, and we can look for variability in ways that we couldn't do when that data was on paper. And we can do that in real time. It also means that we can intervene in real time when those clinicians or patients are making decisions through these digital choice, architecture platforms. We can change the information that's presented when they're prescribing a medication or ordering a test or treatment, or we can change the default options and so on and so forth. And so that really sets itself up to being able to understand how do we then change behavior. And that was the real idea behind the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit, doing this more systematically, testing different ways. Oftentimes people are implementing things in the electronic health record or patient portals and kind of moving forward. And we wanted to take a more systematic approach to see if we could change behavior and then scale that across our organization and other organizations around the world.
Amazing. So you mentioned things like defaults and other types of interventions that you could potentially do. Could you tell us more about some of your favorite projects that you did at the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit?
Sure, I can start with the project that really kickstarted the idea or the interest around the Nudge Unit. Our health system had been struggling at Penn Medicine for years on generic prescribing. As many people know, generics are the exact same as brand name prescriptions, the same chemical formulation, but brand name prescriptions can be much more expensive. And they tried giving clinicians feedback on their performance. We held grand rounds about how we were the worst performing health system in the entire Philadelphia region compared to others. We were even getting penalties from our largest insurer to try to motivate us to prescribe more generics, but it really wasn't working. And so we did a test within internal medicine clinics in the practices where I actually trained, and looked at what if we change the default. And there are different ways you can change the default. It can be what's displayed up front to what's on the final page. And ultimately, after some testing, we realized that we could let the clinician go about their ways. And the clinicians had said they wanted to prescribe generics, but they just don't always remember to do that, or the infrastructure is not there to make it easy. We added a checkbox that said dispense as written. If that wasn't checked, the prescription, whether you ordered the brand or the generic, went to the pharmacy as generic. If it was checked when the physician wanted to prescribe a brand name prescription, then it would go to the pharmacy as brand name. And that small change took about an hour to implement, but it didn't happen very quickly. It basically took over 1 to 2 years for it to actually happen. This was before we had a nudge unit so that we could do this systematically. But it dramatically changed behavior. Our generic prescribing rate went from 75% to 99%, essentially overnight, and has stayed that way for the past 5 years. In just the first 2 years, if you just look at the top 100 meds for what we prescribed, that saved about $32 million in unnecessary prescribing. And much of that benefit went to insurance companies and the patients themselves. So that was like the light bulb moment for the health system. Wow, 1 hour of work. Had we done this, more proactively and systematically, could change behavior. What else is kind of going on in the health system, and led to a kind of a call for proposals, a crowdsourcing campaign for us to start collecting more things and working on this more proactively.
I think that's a really great example because it shows how behavioral science can be such an amazing tool that gives you ROI that nothing else can. When you really understand how to change behavior really effectively, you can do a 1 hour project and get $32 million in results. So that's really, really cool. So from there, that was the project that kicked things off for you all at the Nudge Unit. Can you tell us a little bit more about some other case studies that might inspire our attendees? That seems like a hard one to top.
Yeah, we have a lot of examples. I would say, the first, when we did the crowdsourcing campaign, we expected to get maybe a couple of ideas. We ran it for three weeks, and we got more than 225 submissions for people who said, hey, I'm a nurse on the front line of care. I can see that it would be easier for us to be able to, get patients triaged by doing this, or a clinician who would say, hey, we need to change the default for this and so we took that process. We held like a tournament, and the top 10 ideas got to present to the CEO, the CMO, and the leadership of our health system. And we picked 3. Those 3 were on how do we improve referral for cardiac rehab, how do we decrease unnecessary opioid prescribing, and then specifically in our emergency medicine departments, and then how do we decrease unnecessary imaging for patients who have cancer and at the end of life. And so I'll quickly talk about those. I'll start with the opioid one, since that's, we're still the world is going through an opioid epidemic. Kit Delgado, a colleague of mine in the emergency departments, began to realize is as they transitioned to a new electronic health record, the default for the opioids was 30 tablets. And that kind of makes sense if you come into the ED and you need emergency department and you need your cholesterol medication or your diabetes medication. We'll give you 30 days, and then you go see your doctor within those 30 days. But if you come in for a knee sprain or you twisted your ankle or something, maybe you don't need opioids at all. But if you do, you certainly don't need 30 tablets. And so they recommended adjusting it to the guidelines, which were about 3 to 5 days of opioids. We settled on 10 tablets. And so we implemented that, Kit Delgado's team, and over the course of implemented 3 different emergency departments kind of in sequential fashion, and it cut opioid prescribing in half just by changing the default. Now, again, as many people know, defaults don't force clinicians to prescribe things. So if somebody did come in and they needed more, they could get that. But we were also able to default. So if you search for an opioid, it showed you Tylenol and ibuprofen at the top of the list. And then it showed you the opioid option. So it reminded you, hey, you could prescribe another medication with the opioid, so you can prescribe a smaller dose. And that's helpful because people who are on the size of the first opioid prescription you get is directly linked to whether or not you're going to be taking opioids a year or 2 from now and addicted to them. And so if we can decrease unnecessary opioids, that can be very helpful for public health. Another example in cardiac rehab. Cardiac rehab is a structured exercise program for 12 weeks after you have a heart attack or stroke. It's been shown to reduce readmissions and mortality or death by 30%. Lots of great evidence for it, covered by insurance. Cardiologists will tell us it's like fluoride in the water. Every patient should get it. It's like a free gym membership with a cardiologist on site to give you feedback on your medications and your diet. But less than 15% of our patients were even being referred. That meant if 100 patients have a heart attack at our hospitals, 85 go home without ever being told, hey, you should get cardiac rehab, and it's covered by your insurance. And what we found out is it was really hard to do. It was on paper. The doctors had to fill out like 25 fields while they were rounding on patients. And so we essentially did a couple of things. We made it really easy for the doctors. We pre-templated the form. Now it's all digital, but it used to still be on paper. All they had to do was sign off. And we changed the kind of the script for the patient. It's not, should this patient go to cardiac rehab? It's, is there any reason this patient should not go to cardiac rehab? From opt-in to opt-out kind of discussion. We changed the way they rounded. And then we had a care manager come to the patient with a vetted list of sites that the patient could go to and help them get set up for their appointment. And what happened is we turned that on, and the referral rate went from 15% to 85%, and has been maintained that way ever since. We had a comparison hospital that we compared to that essentially remained flat. And so it was net over a 50 percentage point increase in the referral rate. And referring patients is great, but we want to know, do they actually show up? And the show-up rate went from 33% to 55%, so nearly double. But so net, if you take all the patients before the intervention, 15% were referred, and a third of them went. So 5% actually went to cardiac rehab. Afterwards, it was 55% of 85, which is 40. So we went from 5% cardiac rehab attendance to 40%, 8-fold increase. And if you think about it, we just made it easier for the doctors to do what they had wanted to do. And this is an area that we've been doing more work in as I've transitioned to Ascension around how do we decrease sludge? This idea of like all the stuff that slows down. And so that's a good example of some of the work from Penn where we decrease sludge. Final example from that first crowdsourcing campaigns around imaging at the end of life. Patients who are getting radiation to make the cancer less painful. They don't need X-rays and CT scans every day because those are meant to prevent bad outcomes 20, 30 years from now. But these patients only have days to weeks to live. But 80% of them were getting daily imaging. We realized that there was no default set in the electronic health record, so we just changed the default to no imaging. And the unnecessary imaging rate went from 70% to 30%. The goal was to get about 20 or 30% of patients still need it because they have a complex cancer or they're morbidly obese or something else. And so we were able to really drop that. We saved about 5,000 imaging tests a year. And those were previously bills that were going to the patient's families after the patient passed away. We also were able to give that time back to the patients at the valuable last days of life so they could spend that time with their families. So it was net a win all around.
Amazing. we're hearing a lot about the idea of that intention action gap, right? Of physicians want to do this or patients want to do this, but it can be hard in practice. And so looking outside of interventions that directly target the individual, looking more at the system to make life easy for them or remove sludge, as you said. So very insightful, very clever. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about that contest you mentioned at the beginning, because it sounds like it was open to kind of any healthcare provider in the healthcare system, which is not necessarily who you would think to go to for behavioral science interventions.
Yeah, it was really a learning moment for us. We wanted to do a couple of things when we launched the nudge unit. One is to be able to tell people about it. So this was a good, marketing mechanism for us to say, "Hey, we're the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit. This is what we do. We're focusing our first efforts on how do we improve high value care, decrease low value care." It was open to anyone. You could be a student, a nurse, a tech, an emeritus faculty member. Anyone could really submit an idea. And you're right, these are not the folks that we would ask for, hey, what's the best nudge? But what we wanted to ask them for was, what's the best opportunity to nudge? And then our team would help them design the nudge. And so the people who are at the front lines of care, they see these alerts in the electronic health record. They see the frustrations, the sludge, if you will. And so they're able to service it much better than if we were to ask the chief medical officer of the health system. They definitely know from a big picture what's going on, but being able to ask the front lines of care gives us both kind of sides of the coin. It was such a success that we decided that we were going to do that every 6 months. And so we ended up operationalizing that, creating a platform that we could use to, people could submit ideas. You could comment on other people's ideas. You could thumb up or thumbs down it. So almost let the crowd kind of vote on what the best ideas were. And we would run it basically every 6 months. And at steady state, we were getting 60 to 70 kind of requests for help. And as time went on, we were able to increase the amount that we would take. So we used to do 3, we were able to increase up to 5 and then 10. And over the course of 5 years, we worked on over 100 of those different requests.
Incredible. I think that speaks really well to why the best practice is co-creation, right? Nothing about me without me is the principle that we all try to strive for with these sorts of things. So that's really cool to hear how you guys put that together. Very interesting. So you started to mention Ascension, which is where you're working now. What would you say is the biggest difference between the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit and the work you're doing now at Ascension? And can you tell us more about what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so Ascension is the second largest health system in the United States, the largest nonprofit health system. We have more than 150 hospitals across 20 states and the District of Columbia, and then more than 3,000 practice sites for outpatient clinics. And so it's much bigger scope. Penn Medicine was 6 hospitals within 2 or 3 states. And so that the real focus here is around how do we take behavioral science and implement it into the everyday operations of the organization, and then launch programs at scale. The initial focus has been on a couple of things. How do we change behavior from a patient perspective? How do we give them take some of the examples of the work that we've done at Penn and apply them before you go to see your doctor, after you go to see your doctor, to say, hey, you're going to see your doctor. Here's some topics that might be important for you to discuss. Or you just saw your doctor, they ordered these tests. Here's a link to fill them out, and then kind of nudging them to schedule them, and so on and so forth. But the thing we really started with first when I got to Ascension was, how do we reduce sludge? And we came up with a couple of things that we found. So one was, a lot of the stuff that we could increase was just adding a digital option. So we were trying to change a lot of our members of the health system from one prescription benefits plan to another, but it was really slow. It was all done by phone call. You had to call in to transfer your prescriptions. And over the course of 6 months, the conversion rate was about 10%. So our pharmacy team would call 1,000 patients, and 100 of them would convert. And we had a backlog of 60,000 that we had to convert in the next couple of months. And so what we did is we took the members of the health system, and we did a quick test. We took about 1,000 of them, and we created a digital form embedded within the email that had it turned out we had your information. We had your home address. We had your phone number. You just had to confirm that it was still up to date. And then we basically gave them an option to be able to either submit the form without ever leaving their email, or edit it within their email and then click. And within 1 week, the conversion rate jumped from 10% to 72%. So 7-fold increase. And if you think about it, like, we weren't having this team manually calling patients and trying to find them and get them to answer the phone. And then the data was now in a digital format, so it could be downloaded, uploaded to our pharmacy benefit system, and the accounts were automatically created. So it was a lot of great work there. Another kind of thing we wanted to do was around compliance for COVID vaccination. Our members of our health system had to submit documentation, their COVID vaccine cards, but the process required a large number of steps. You had to take a picture. You can only do it through your computer. So you had to take a picture with your phone, then you had to email it to yourself, then you had to download it from your email, then you had to log into a website and then upload it. And so compliance was low, not because people weren't vaccinated, but because they just weren't submitting their cards. And so what we did is we created a way that people could just take a picture and upload it right from their phone. And then we allowed them to do that really quickly. And we found that that doubled compliance rates in the first few weeks after we implemented it. And so really reducing the number of steps. So adding a digital option, reducing the number of steps were a couple of the key things that we found that were really helpful for getting rid of some of the sludge in the health system.
Sounds like your first year has been off to a very good start. That's amazing. So, a couple follow-up questions there. How has your experience as the behavioral science nudge expert been different on such a larger scale? Ascension, you mentioned, is a huge hospital health system compared to the one location at Penn Medicine. So I imagine the approach that you must take in creating these interventions and identifying opportunities might be a bit
different. Yeah, I think because we have basically 20 different kind of states and a lot of different markets, I think something that was critical from the start was getting a champion or an infrastructure within each of those markets, but being able to plug into the existing infrastructure. So at the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit, we had our own team that was really doing a lot of this centrally. At an organization that's much larger, these organizations tend to be more matrixed in that you have your behavioral science team over here, you've got your data team, you've got your marketing team, you've got your clinical team, and you have to now interface with all of those to be able to move things forward. So I think coordinating these efforts can be a little bit more challenging because you have to coordinate across them. But once you've figured out a structure to do that, you actually brings a lot of benefits because each of those groups has their own expertise, and you're able to leverage that and then build a behavioral science kind of ecosystem within that. I think the important thing was really getting some of the quick wins, as I mentioned, to kind of establish kind of like, hey, we can really move the needle here. But I found that the organization has been really, open, supportive, and really hungry for being able to embed behavioral science within the operations of the health system. The real challenge is how do we get these programs to scale across the system? We have 50 plus electronic health record instances. Penn Medicine, we had one electronic health record, so you implement it, it's everywhere. Here we have to figure out how do we create a process for this distributed electronic health record system. And so it's had its own kind of operational challenges, but that has been really interesting in terms of the insights that they reveal around how we can embed this within clinician workflow and really make it easier for docs on the ground.
Makes sense. So what would you say you're most excited about for the future of behavioral science in healthcare? And where do you see it having the most impact, especially in the private sector?
I think there's a lot of opportunities. I would say, in the past, 5 years, the duration while I was working at Penn Medicine, we were doing a lot of building the evidence, demonstrating that we can take some of the insights that have been used in finance and retail and apply them to healthcare. And we have many examples, and every month there's another example of a nudge in healthcare that's being published. I think the real thing that I'm excited about is there's still a lot of room for us to actually get this embedded as an everyday practice. So it's not something special when we're thinking about behavioral science, it's just how we work. And so I think there's where the opportunity is. How can we get this when you're thinking about how do we recruit patients to a clinical trial, whether you're the health system or a pharma company, thinking about, do we frame the invitation as opt-in versus opt-out? Leveraging some of the work we've done, showing we can triple enrollment rates through that. How do we improve patient experience through this? And then I think as we start to get some of this embedded, it really creates the opportunities for us to start to use what we call behavioral phenotyping. That's some of the work I was doing at the tail end of when I was at Penn, is how do we match the right intervention to the right patient or the right doctor? A lot of the interventions today are one size fits all. Insurance program will deploy a program for 5 million members, but all of those people have different attitudes, past experiences, preferences, engagement. And so thinking about how do we test and scale programs that can personalize these approaches and then target them to meet the needs of the patient or the doctor. I think that's where we can make a lot of progress in the future.
Oh, that's really great, Mitesh. I am impatient to read a book from you with all your advice, experience. I think it would be really wonderful for a lot of professionals to know more about what you have done, and also based on your experience, what are your recommendations for the healthcare sector. So I'm sure that you are very busy, but if you have some time, I would love to see and to read a book from you. So thanks so much for sharing this insight. Again, I think Suzanne told you it's really amazing, and I think really your experience is very helpful for all those interested in the application of behavioral science. Maybe one last question before we start our roundtable. What is the one piece of advice you would give to healthcare professionals who would like to start applying behavioral science?
I think the common thing that I hear from people are, I have a great idea. I want to change something within my organization, but I don't know where to get started. We don't have a nudge unit currently. We don't have a big team. We don't have experts in behavioral science. And I often tell people that the best way to get started at your organization is to launch something at small scale, learn quickly, and then develop that quick win or the credibility within the organization to start expanding that capability. Many people kind of are waiting for experts to come, and I think we're looking to train and help expand the reach. So I really my advice to people is if you have a great idea, go ahead and do it, but test it. Test it in one group versus another. Learn from it, and that'll give you the data you need to be able to take that small kind of intervention and build upon that and snowball to a large organization within your group.
So thanks a lot for this final advice, Mitesh. It was great to have this opportunity to discuss with you. Thank you.
Global head of behavioral data science, compliance, risk, and ethics at Novartis. And my big friend, Beltran Bakula, who is the VP of BVA Nudge Consulting in France, and also one of our champions leading the pharma and healthcare practice within our organization.
So you know Antoine and Beltran by now from some of the other sessions, but I'd like to introduce Odile Pixoto, who's our colleague from BVA France, who oversees the BVA Health, and she will be monitoring this session with these guys here in person and with Dana online. After you, Odile.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very pleased, very excited to see you all, and knowing that a lot of people all around the world are listening to this first table session discussion related to the healthcare and using nudge and science, behavioral science in healthcare. We've got 30 minutes together, and I have a goal. My goal is really to give you relevant insight about behavioral science in the field of healthcare. So you'll have 10 minutes at the end of the discussion to ask questions. So please get your question ready. Dana, are you here?
Yes,
it's a pity you are not here on stage, but we are very pleased to have you there. We are going to, first of all, ask to each one of you how you discover the behavioral science and why you decided to use it as a professional. Dana, if you want to start.
Oh yeah, yes. Actually, it's probably been, what, 10 years? And I, in one summer, just, took a book, and it was Daniel Kahneman's book. And I was like working in pharma already and whatever. And it was just such a revelation for me, on a personal and on a professional level, and starting sort of thinking differently about behavioral sciences. I'm a doctor by training, and not once in my training have we had any kind of such innovative approach. And I thought, oh, all these years I've missed.
Antoine?
Yeah, thank you. Super happy to be here again. So yeah, for me, I mean, it kind of, depending how far we want to be, but I want to go. But I guess it really started with me when I finished my high school, and as a rubbish student, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I felt, I'm going to do economics, that's great, social policy, the impact, and then I realized, oh God, I'm really bad at math, that's not going to do. And then I thought, I'm going to do psychology, human, brain and the decision-making process, and then I thought, but then I'm going to be either a clinical psychologist or a professor of psychology. And then so I did business. Right? So that's how I spent the last decade of my career, business, consulting, transformation, et cetera, et cetera. But then, a bit like Dana, actually, the first time I picked a book that was on the topic was 2008. And it was Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, that gets into that, social psychology of change, et cetera. But really like Dana, then the real book that I picked a bit more than 10 years ago was the Kahneman book. And then I did a master in behavioral science at the LSE about 10 years ago, get a proper training. And then for the part of the question that relates to why choose to apply that professionally, then it's linked to my experience in business and consulting. I felt like what we were doing is shifting the deck of cards, really. We go from centralization to decentralization to offshoring, nearshoring, backshoring, whatever. And I was like, but what's the impact on people's behavior? And depressingly, sometimes it was not much. And I felt I need to do something with a bit more meaning, a bit more purpose. And I felt the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. And you, Bertrand?
Just like Antoine, first, it was during my studies. I first heard about behavioral science, especially about biases. Even at that time, I didn't know this name of behavioral sciences. And in my work, when I started at BVA, because at BVA it is really part of our DNA to work on behavior. And it is thanks to Eric that one day came in my office and told me, okay, we will work on behavioral science. And I say, okay, let's do that, even if I didn't know what it was at the time. So it was the way we did this. And BVA, we are quite pioneer in using behavioral sciences knowledge because we did the first behavioral science intervention in France with the French government in 2013. So it's been a long time, and that's it, yeah.
Okay, so Dana, we heard previously Mitesh telling us that with 1 hour work, he was able to change physicians' prescription overnight for a large amount of them. So how do you react? Is it so easy to change physicians' prescription using nudge?
Well, you know what? That's very much the elephant in the room when it comes to the use in pharma of nudge. Now, just before I go there, just the use of this sort of behavioral science and using the nudge, the first thing I sort of regretted is not having read and understood that when my son was a baby and a little boy. And I systematically used the system 2, system B, in order to raise him, when I should have thought about system 1. So when it comes to pharma, I mean, there is, we devote our lives and our time and the company's huge amounts of money to actually develop innovations which give promises, life promises to patients. But there is something that still needs to be understood, because the moment when you finalize the development, you get the approval of the regulatory body to sort of commercialize your drug. Then there are a certain number of, you even get reimbursement for the drug, let's put it this way, and it's listed. But then there is a certain number of steps before that drug can deliver the actual promise. And those steps are, we as pharma address HCPs, doctors. It has to be known, it has to be understood, it has to be prescribed, and then it has to be actually taken by patients on the right duration. So each of these steps are very different, actually. So as pharma, as a very highly regulated structure, we use system B, we use system 2. We need to make sure, I mean, awareness is not so much of a problem. We end up making sure that our innovation, get the right level of awareness. Understanding means basically going completely through system 2, which means explaining the data, showing the evidence-based, going into the details of the statistics of it and the clinical elements and whatever alpha spending in the statistical plan has been, actually looked after or not looked after. So everything goes into incredible level of scientific details. That's the part of understanding. And then you're off the picture and the doctor decides to prescribe or not to prescribe. And then you're again off the picture and the patient decides to take it once, twice, for 1 month, or for 3 years. And where we realize that basically the nudge can sort of start, or needs to start really, is after the understanding element of it. So after system 2 has been really completely sort of fed and choices, rational choices have been made. But then you can realize that doctors are just like all of us, and I can say that, just are all of us. I mean, habits are sometimes so much stronger than your intellectual understanding and conviction. Just because you have prescribed something for 10 years, well, the chances that you'll get the prescription to the next patient of that drug that you've prescribed for 10 years and not the innovation that you are convinced of because you've seen all the data and so on, but it's just not top of your mind and it's just not there. That is a very significant moment where nudges are important. And, we have not many examples, but we have a few. And the other element is, how do you make sure that at the end of the day, this drug is actually taken by patients? So compliance, adherence to treatment. And that's a place where basically we probably need to work much more with all other stakeholders, with Mitesh and with carers, and just work more to make sure that instead of having, a sort of negative nudge to patients, and, we can talk about that, we get into a positive nudge for patients to actually take the drugs they're prescribed.
Maybe, Antoine, you want to add something to emphasize that behavioral science in healthcare has nothing to do with a magic wand or Tinkerbell.
How do you guess? Amazing. No, yes, I'll get that, but maybe first, just to come back to what Dana has been saying, because I think that's something that's quite interesting. So all caveat apply. I work in pharma. I don't do necessarily behavioral science yet for the business, right? I work in ethics risk compliance. But being in pharma, of course, we work with the topic in a different angle, but I'm there. And I think so what I've observed is that what I guess might be, and I think you've alluded to that, Dana, might be specific for pharma organization, and the challenge and the paradox that we'll face is that I think it's twofold, right? One is we and where behavioral science could help. So one, we spend vast amount of money running extremely complex, extremely well-designed, large-scale clinical control trial, right? We have placebo-controlled trials. We measure it's extremely scientific. So all the way up to when we know the product is actually, or the treatment is actually effective, robust, sound science. Sometime when we get to the other side and more in the corporate and marketing, then we tend to lose a little bit that experimentation mindset. And sometimes we then go a bit more to what's best practice and what we've been doing as a company. And I think this is the first paradox, that we need to continue that experimentation mindset. Like Mitesh has been saying, let's try things out, right? And so that's one paradox that we have, that we are super sciencey in terms of the science for the treatment, and then we're not as sciencey for the science of putting that in the hands of patients, right? That's one paradox that's interesting. And the other one is similar paradox. We spend vast amount of money to test things out and see whether they're actually a bit more or largely more effective than others. So we focus all our efforts up to the point where the treatment are developed into the effectiveness, right? Is this going to work? And then what we have to do sometimes is just kind of let that go, right? To your point, Anna, that's not what's going to convince necessarily the doctor. It's important. They need to know, but we also need to consider all the things there. And it's hard to do when that's the only thing we've been thinking about for 5 years, right? So those are the two paradoxes that makes it both harder, but also makes the opportunities of using behavioral science in pharma even bigger. And yes, to your point, quickly then, just to react, and I guess, well, Mitesh has demonstrated the opposite. Most of the time, I believe, it's hard to work an hour and make $32 million saving. That was the case. That doesn't happen all the time, right? And so I think what's important is that people, and I think I made that point in the other panel, people who want to use behavioral science, they need to realize that if you're hiring a behavioral scientist, you're not hiring a magician, right? You're hiring a scientist. And science by itself is a slow process. It's sometimes a slug. It's a process of marginal gains. You can have a quick win. You can have this nudge there that works perfectly. Most of the time, actually, it will take some time. And I think if we go in there with clear expectations, sometimes that is better over the long term, because people will put in the effort and be patient enough, and they will not move to the next, trend, let's put it this way. Thank you.
You're so right. I mean, I was just, sorry to interrupt you. No, I was just going to say that I like the let go part of what you said. Let go, but let go in a sort of structured and scientific approach way. And that's very much also where the nudge is. What do we do usually when basically we have, for instance, we have developed all those very expensive and when, results are positive, that is an amazing achievement when you have a clinical trial with a clear superiority of one drug versus another drug, for instance, in terms of efficacy and or in terms of safety. You clearly know that that drug definitely needs to go to the patient because it's otherwise, it's a loss of chance for that patient. And what do we do usually when we actually see that, well, doctors just heard us, but didn't react to that? Just sort of, we must not have been clear enough in our explanation. So we go even further down and discussing the roots of the statistical part and exactly what the data was and the subpopulations and da-da-da. And we go even more in-depth into the system too. And the truth of the matter most of the time is sometimes what the doctor needs to do there is just become conscious of his own bias. For instance, just a bias that it's habit or because he thinks, he tries to think like a patient, which is not. And believes that whatever, for instance, that if a drug is given twice a day, it's going to be not so well adhered to by patients. So he'd rather use the once a day, even though results maybe are not that great, but nevertheless, he thinks that it's much better for patients. So having this approach and accepting that a prescriber is truly a human being with its own bias, that is probably a critical tipping point there.
Bertrand, do you want to add something? You work a lot for pharma companies, but also you work for public health organizations. So maybe there's something also to nudge around the patient path, treatment pathway, or hospitals, as Mitesh demonstrated earlier.
Yeah, sure. I think it is really interesting for both pharma industry and public health organizations to use behavioral science knowledge, because in one common direction, to make the medical system more patient-centric and maybe less disease-focused or administration-focused or product-focused, and think that patients as HCPs are just human beings and that they're affected by some biases that they have to take into account to improve their action, whether it is products, services, or public policies, or prevention programs, medical communication. I think this one is really important to be sure that the medical information for both patients and HCPs is clear, intuitive, simple. I think there is something behind this idea of simplification that Mitesh talked about. That's really important. And for instance, I think in public health, we work a lot on prevention issues. And I think it is really important to understand the biases that prevent people to treat themselves correctly, because it is key. And before to treat, we have to prevent the disease. And for instance, we see a lot of biases, just like overconfidence bias, that explain that we think that we will never get sick, so why to get vaccinated, for instance? Or maybe just like things like that, time discounting, thinking that, okay, I'm young, so health is a tomorrow issue. And if you don't understand that, it is really difficult. Even if the product is good, the service is good, it's really difficult to engage people if we don't understand the biases at play. And that's really a key point for me, for both, yeah.
Okay. Do you have, any of you, a very practical and concrete example of nudge to be used for healthcare, either for healthcare system or patient pathway or physician prescriptions or any kind?
Can I just react first to one thing
do.
that you've said, which I think is really interesting, and I was reflecting about that the last few months, and I think you're right, and I understand what you say when you say that. Yes, we need to be more patient-centric. At the same time, when you push that logic a little bit more, right? Because it's the thing, and I'm sure Dana, you'll agree, in not just Novartis, but I guess not just pharma as well. That we want to be patient-centric, right? We want that patient centricity. But think about it for a second. Is that what patient wants? Because what's the first thing patient wants? Not to be one, right? So do patients want to be reminded that they are patients all the time? Is that the best thing to achieve for us? Or is it just, maybe considered as people as general, and patients is just part of their life? And I think that happens because sometimes we fail to flip the perspective that we have on the problem to the perspective of the person. So I think we need to go even beyond, right, patient centricity, because maybe that's the best thing we need to do to achieve, I guess, patients. But I know what you meant, but I think it's funny when you think and you push
I
the logic.
agree with you. I think the system must be more human-centric. Yeah, it is better. Yeah, sure.
But that is completely, and that's a conundrum, honestly. And that I mean, how do you put together the absolute need of transparency in terms of, for instance, when you look at our label, the patient information on our drugs, for instance, where the need for absolute transparency means that we with the regulatory body together, we will be mentioning, for any drug, I'm not speaking specifically of one or the other, we will be mentioning every single adverse event that happened. And as a reminder, adverse events are not necessarily linked to the drug. It's anything wrong that happened to the patient during the study, the clinical study. And we are mentioning that and obviously mentioning the percentage of probability that that can happen. And that usually takes a huge part of the information. Rightly so, I would say. Absolutely rightly so. Now, the point is, this acts as a negative nudge for patients' compliance. Because most of the time when patients will read that, they will not necessarily relate. And how can you relate as to sort of probabilities? What is the level of probability when one thing is expressed as one risk in 100,000? I don't know. Is that big? Is that small? Will that be me? So I think there is a lot of work to be done in order to, about patient centricity, truly, to sort of understand exactly what level of information and how this information should be presented to patients in order to make sure that, you know, they get the promise that those drugs give them, and they only get that if they take the drug long enough to get the efficacy.
Any of you have a practical and concrete example of nudge developed in healthcare?
Maybe one example that you can find in the literature, but it was a mechanism that we used when working with the French government during the COVID crisis to encourage people to get vaccinated. There were an experiment that was realized by some researchers in the US some years ago about how to get employees to get vaccinated against the flu. Vaccinated for free, I precise, and they sent some emails, and they tested 3 kinds of email. The first email was just remind to people the opening hours of the clinic where they can get their vaccination. The second email was sent with asking people to complete the date they wanted to go to the clinic to get their vaccination, and the third one to complete the date, but also the time slot. And what they saw as a result, that when you ask people to complete the date plus the time slot, the vaccination rate increased by 12% compared to the controlled email. And why? Because it is playing on what we call the pre-engagement mechanism, asking people to develop a plan, what they will do in the future, make them more engaged to increase their commitment towards the behavior and the chance that they adopt it. That's just one example, but it is really efficient, and it is this kind of mechanism we used also for the COVID vaccination.
Okay. One last question before we leave the questions of the audience. One last question. Do you have any recommendation, any key point or special vision for the future developing behavioral science in healthcare? What are your advice? Have you something really important to say to the audience?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I think one thing that's naturally close to what we do, being in ethics, risk, and compliance, is making sure that we ensure within the pharma industry and we have the guardrails and the frameworks in place for ensuring an ethical and sustainable use of behavioral science, right? And I think that's extremely essential because we all recognize as the pharma industry or the margin of error we are operating with is extremely thin, right? And we have to build trust with society, and that trust can go away very quickly. So we have to think about, not only how we use behavioral science. If you type ethics of behavioral science, that's the first thing that comes up. And so many people have worked on that, and there's lots of framework there. Even Carstensen has written on this one, and it's about transparency, it's about preserving agency. So there's the how of behavioral science, and I think that's the first step. The real question is not so much how we use it, but becomes for what purposes do we choose to use that? And as we discussed, there's so many examples of using behavioral science that benefits not only the company, but the industry equally, society as well. Patient medication adherence, that's a problem you solve that benefits everybody. So we will have to be extremely cautious and leaders in choosing areas that actually not just increase the share of a cake, but increase the full cake. And I think that's something that is really important.
The question of why is really important because it's much more powerful than the question why not. Anything to say, Beltrán, Dana?
Yes, maybe in terms of issues, as Antoine mentioned, I think there is something behind chronic disease. I think it is something that is really important and that is win-win for the patient, but also for the pharma industry and for the medical system. So I think that we have something to do using behavioral science in this issue in the future.
Dana, do you have any advice to share?
I have to say that my passion, I mean, I'm looking after oncology. I'm really passionate about that. And honestly, I think that there is one thing that we can change the world. We can change the world of cancer and make cancer really sort of, at least a chronic disease or a disease of yesterday. But getting cancer very early is critical. And to get cancer very early, you need people to accept screening and making sure that they do that. And typically, and you were also asking about concrete examples, if we do collectively, stakeholders, public policy, if we do big ads saying cancer kills, please get screened, we get the results we get today. How about tomorrow saying cancer is curable, get screened? And that for me is the essence of the change that we might want to sort of start working on.
Thank you very much. So we are nearly at the end of our session. Maybe it's time for the questions of the audience. Is there anyone who wants to share a question, ask a question to our panelists?
Live question, it's amazing.
Thank you. Earlier you said that we need to mobilize the patient system 1 to help them make better decisions. But do we need to mobilize exclusively the system 1, or are there any other cases where we need to attract their attentions thanks to nudges to make them use their system 2?
Very interesting questions.
I think it's for Dana, if I'm correct, right? You're the one that mentioned System 1, then. But go ahead, and I'm happy to.
But it's for all of us, I think. I can take that because I think it's a fantastically interesting question. I don't believe for 1 second, to be honest, that we need to sort of, address patients based only on their System 1. What I'm saying is that addressing patients on their System 2, without necessarily, two things, without necessarily having them have all the relevant sort of structure, scientific sometimes structure, to sort of get the right information, might need to be considered. Not that they should not be addressed, but we need to consider that. And the second element is, I think that, there is this, accepting the bias of the human being when it is a patient, when it is a doctor, when it is whoever that is. And I suppose that bias is even sometimes more important when you are in the distress of being sick. But at that point in time, it comes to what Mitesh was saying and what others are saying. And I think Beltrán was saying that as well. And it's just, it's nudge for good. And I think we all can take somebody's good hand to lead us, specifically when we are a patient. So that's very much my sort of view on that. It's both, but we only do two nowadays.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dana. And then to answer your question, I guess if you put aside system 1, system 2 for a second, right? That's a very useful model of how we think. But as Kahneman says in his book, there's no such thing as system 1, system 2. I'm just trying to help you explain how this works, right? It's just one brain. And I think, to your point, Dana, it's both then, or it's nothing, right? It's the fact that, how do you make sure you understand what patients or what people that have disease attend to, what they pay attention to. That's what will influence what they think about as well, and that's what will influence their behavior, right? So there's no like secret system 1, I'm not thinking about anything, I'm doing stuff. It's more about the cues that you pick up from the environment, the cues you pick up from the label, and the things you pay attention to. That's what will influence your thinking process as well, and thus what will influence your behavior. So it's always about system 1 and 2. It's never one or the other. Sometimes, you actually don't think about things at all, but most of the time, most of the circumstances is both things together that you have to influence. And the point of data is really, of course, to say, don't try to just give information. Try to help them pay attention to things that are important, that are valid, that will helpfully influence what they think about and then how they behave as well. So it's both things together.
If I just can add something, in healthcare there is something different from other kind of purchase of services. It must be a long-lasting behavior. So, for example, system 1 can be really useful to switch from one behavior to another, to pay attention to something. But if you want to install the behavior in the time, and normally it's necessary for the patient to take his medicine, or for the patient, every people to change their habit, to stop, to quit smoking, and so on. You have to keep it on time. So this is system 2. If you don't have system 2 engaged, you will change because your mind will be attracted by something else. So I agree, system 1 plus system 2 in healthcare especially are very important to be actioned. Another question. I read the question. Do you have any examples of nudges to encourage healthy behaviors in the hospital environment?
Mitesh, where are you?
Yes, there are some example of nudges in this matter. For instance, it can be when you are at the hospital. It can be for the HCPs, but also for the patient, of course. How to encourage people to eat healthy, or to take the stairs instead of taking the elevator, things like that. And for instance, to encourage people to eat healthy, you can nudge the cafeteria. For instance, having at the eye level the healthy meals, fruits and vegetables instead of having cookies and so on, and use some default option. For instance, change the pathway in the cafeteria to make sure that people first meet the healthy meals before the unhealthy ones, for example, or to encourage people to take the stairs, for instance, having giving them some rewards about using the stairs in terms of I don't know, calories, in terms of physical shape, especially when you are in re-education. It can be a part of the re-education, something that don't seem too medical and that is easy to do for the patient and can be just framed this way. Yeah. And there are so many interventions possible in that topics. Maybe.
Yeah, no, sure. There's one that's, I guess, is not exactly encourage healthy behavior, but that's an example of a nudge in an hospital or clinic environment. And I think that's one that covers a lot of the themes that we've evoked. So one of my previous organization that worked with the NHS at some point, and then we're trying to tackle, no-shows for medical appointments, right? So people have medical appointment, they don't show up. And one of the strategy that was in place is to say, okay, that's an information problem. They don't understand how big of a problem that is. And we'll just tell them how big of a problem that is, and then they'll think about it, and then they'll do something better than their behavior, right? Which is the typical way we solve sometimes those kind of problems. And so what they did is they worked with the environment that they had, and okay, so let's put up posters in the waiting rooms. And those posters will describe how big the problem is. There's hundreds of thousands of missed appointments all over the UK on numbers made up, by the way, I have no idea, on a yearly basis, and that costs like X million of pounds, and that's how many lives could have been saved, and that's the posters coming up on the waiting room. Now, if you ask yourself the first question, you realize how the solution might not be fit, which is who's coming, who actually is on the waiting room? Well, the people that show up to the appointments, not the people that are not there, right? So you're targeting the wrong, audience there. And so what was done instead is a simple nudge, and I really don't remember how much that was replicated or scaled up, but at that time there was a simple nudge, I think, for that particular clinic or set of clinic, which is at the point in time where people were, and it was like pre-COVID and everything was physical, right? So at the time that the people will take the appointment, they will walk to the desk, and the person behind the desk will kind of try to find the right slot, and then they would give a card to the person. The person would have to write the date and time of the appointment on the card themselves, right? And then they would have to repeat that verbally to the person behind the counter, right? And that itself made a bit of a commitment, to your point, Bertrand. There's a small commitment, like, I've said that I will be there, I said it out loud, and I managed to reduce about, I think, I don't know, it was between 10 and 15% of no-show, which is so much better than 0% reduction with the posters, which maybe had an adverse effect, actually, right? So that was an example of a nudge in a hospital environment.
The previous question was about more specifically hygiene in hospital, because of course hospital is a very nudgeable place in terms of reducing sludge, not even nudge, but just reducing administrative burden would be great. But the previous question was specifically concerning the hygiene. Maybe you can talk about this experiment with the lemon flavor.
It is a really famous experiment, and the purpose was to encourage HCPs to wash their hands before to enter the intensive care department. And when the researchers observed HCPs, there was only 50% of them that was washing their hands before to enter the door. And what they tried with success was to put a lemon scent behind the door. And in fact, what they saw is that people wash more their hand with a lemon scent. They spend from 50% to 47% of people washing their head. Why? Because it is this lemon scent acts just like a reminder, a cue that was Antoine was talking about before, that plays on system 1, reminding people, okay, lemon scent, hygiene. I have washed my hand? No, so I wash my hand. That's a simple example of how your nudge can be used.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. A question more specifically for AstraZeneca and Novartis. Did you manage to infuse behavioral science on a larger scale in your organization?
Working on it.
Same, which actually in French terms means not yet entirely, but working on it.
Maybe using the step-by-step is a good thing to do.
No,
maybe we should nudge ourselves to nudge properly.
No, yeah, it's something that has been recognized as something really useful, and there's different flavors of behavioral science, and there's different ways you can actually embed that in the organization. Either in marketing teams, you can look at the angle of like customer experience or user experience. You can look at the angle of patient's insight. You can look at the angle of market research. You can look at anything, right? So I think the question is, how do you actually start looking at that and doing something a bit more coherent and structured? And then so that you make the most of the behavioral science and working on it.
But I think that the we're never as good in whatever we do than when we apply it to ourselves. And most probably, this is a very good question, because before being able to efficiently sort of use and scientifically use nudge on a larger public health scale, it's good to have it with your own teams and structures. And I think we should start already with our own behaviors in companies. And that is probably a huge experimental sort of topic that we are sort of looking to start.
Just to add one last point on this subject, but we have more and more demand of public health organization or pharma industry companies, not only to use behavioral sciences to change patient or HCP's behavior, but to train people within the organization to be more aware of the impact of biases on the human decision process. Yeah, and I think it is a way to infuse behavioral sciences within organization.
Thank you so much, Dreamful panelists, and thank you for your very relevant questions, all of you.
Thank you.
I had a question, but I didn't want to open up a whole kettle of fish, but you'll be hearing from me. I'm just thinking, I was reading in the news this morning on my way here that at the UN General Assembly, which is happening right now, the WHO has published a report that said every 2 seconds, someone under the age of 70 dies from a preventable disease or a easily or more easily catch disease, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, etc. And so I guess one of the things I'd like us to think about when we think about applying
You want
behavioral...
to put some fun in our session.
Exactly. But I think also what we know is that when we prioritize behavioral challenges, it's also who's going to lead the charge. So if we know this is true, is it up to pharma? Is it up to health systems? Is it up to governments? We all know we should eat more healthily. We all know we should exercise more. We all know we should get screened for cancers more. But at the end of the day, who owns the charge? And I think that's going to be one of the ways in which we're going to have to think about behavioral science applied to healthcare. Is there's a lot of parties. Is it insurance? Where do we play? Anyway, it's time for our next roundtable. Eric, take it away.
Exacted. And we are very honored to welcome some great panelists for the second roundtable of this so important healthcare and pharma session. So we welcome from the US, Kate Kirchner. Kate is Senior Marketing Manager at Boston Scientific, leading the strategy for the patient education team for Watchman. We welcome to Kim Burchard, who is a patient education specialist for the Watchman Care team, and my colleague and our friend, Suzanne, to share a real-life case study I see entitled Enhancing Patient Call Center Performance with Behavioral Science. So, Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Actually, I'll start off with Gadi. So Gadi Schönheit is the head of BA Doxa Pharma in Italy, and he's the vice president there, and he'll lead the conversation because Suzanne actually is a participant in this one. So Gadi, after you.
Okay. So let's start the second half roundtable. We discuss now about Watchman case. What is Watchman? Watchman is a scientific device developed by Boston Scientific. The purpose of behavioral science is to help the enhance of call center communication to propose Watchman, a one-time procedure that reduces the risk of stroke in patients with non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Now, Suzanne and our friends of Boston Scientific, up to you to present the case, and then we go on with questions and answers.
Excellent. Thank you, Gadi. Very happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this presentation. We are just getting our screen sharing up and running. But in the meantime, we will add a little bit more detail about each of our roles. I think would be helpful for everyone for some context. So Kate, would you like to introduce yourself in a little more detail?
Sure thing. So Kate Kirchner at Boston Scientific. I am on the Watchman marketing team.
Stopped.
And on the Watchman team, I lead our efforts along with Kim Burchard at our partner company, Salytics, to raise awareness and build on education for patients who are interested in learning more about Watchman. And we do that. I'll introduce Kim, my colleague, who leads our team of patient education specialists to educate patients, and turn it over to her.
My name is Kim Burchard, and I'm a patient education specialist for the Watchman Care team. I've been working with the Watchman program for over 3 years now, and have over 16 years of experience in a wide variety of roles, serving both patients and customers. I'm actually part of a leadership team that mentors new hires, and I really enjoy nurturing. It's my favorite part of my job, nurturing both patients and the associates that I work with. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll turn it back over to you, Suzanne.
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Kirkendall. I lead our North America office at BVA Nudge Consulting, and my background is very deep in health behavior change, health communication, public health. And so this project was a really nice culmination of all of those skills, both at Nudge and specifically in the healthcare sector. So very excited that Kate and Kim are willing and able to share this case study with you. It's always a treat when we can share specifics. So why don't we get into it?
Sounds good. So, I am very excited to share with you today how we brought behavioral science principles into our patient education calls. We continuously monitor and improve our communication. So we're going to talk to you about how we continuously try to allow more patients and talk to their doctor about a treatment option that can improve their life. But just to set the stage, and it sounds like Gadi did that a little bit to begin with a brief overview of our company and what we do. Boston Scientific is dedicated to transforming the lives through innovative medical solutions that improve the health of patients around the world. So we have several innovative solutions for disease states spanning urology to neurological diseases and cardiology and cancer. So today we'll be speaking specifically about a program that we have to educate patients with our partner company, Salytics, as I mentioned, with Kim Burchard and our patient education team. And it's specifically around Watchman. So again, the Watchman implant is a one-time procedure that reduces the risk of stroke in people with a heart condition called non-valvular atrial fibrillation. And on the next slide, you'll see that a little bit deeper into what atrial fibrillation is for those who may be unfamiliar, but it is a prevalent and growing condition and a leading cause of stroke. In fact, the risk of stroke is 5 times greater for AFib patients. So they're prescribed a blood thinner that helps prevent clots, but comes with an increased risk of bleeding. So the Watchman implant has been implanted in over 150,000 people worldwide, and 96% of those patients were able to stop taking blood thinners. So our program, as you'll see on the next slide, is really focused on how do we educate patients that are unaware that this is an option and are interested in learning more about alternatives to their blood thinners. The graphic on the right is one piece of our education to help people understand that 90% of stroke-causing clots come from the heart, form in the left atrial appendage, or LAA, and that's the area that Watchman closes off, that part of the heart, to keep the blood from escaping, and is an alternative to those long-term blood thinners. So how we come into the picture here, on the Boston Scientific Watchman marketing team, I work with a team of people that reach patients through TV commercials, social media, and digital. And we also connect patients to other patients so they can learn about their experiences. But one of the ways that we educate patients is via the phone and email as patients call in or want to understand more about Watchman. And that's where Kim Burchard and her team come in and they educate patients on the phone. So that's really the program that we're talking about and the case study we're talking about here today. So our objective in working with BVA Nudge was really to encourage these eligible patients to talk to their doctor about Watchman and continuously have a good conversation with their doctor to see if it's right for them. So with that, I'll kind of let Suzanne talk about what our project was, and Kim will be giving some great examples of how we use this in practice every day.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. Yes, so when we first started working with Kate and the whole team at Boston Scientific, this was our goal. How do we get patients to talk to their doctor about Watchman? And in this case, we're looking at this particular touch point in the patient journey of they're speaking early in their journey to patient education specialists. How do we get the absolute most out of that phone call to make it as effective as possible for this behavioral objective? So for this approach, we took a fairly typical behavioral science approach to this project. So at the beginning, what we did was, of course, we had our kickoff call, after which we received the call guide that the patient education specialists use and are trained on. Did the screen just disappear for everyone else? All right, seems like we don't have a screen, but that's okay. I know what we did for this project. So, yes, so we were able to receive the call discussion guide, which is something that the patient education specialists are trained on and can refer to during their calls, but it's not something that the patients see, to be clear, but it's an important part of how the conversation goes from the patient education specialist side. Here we are, we're back. From there, we also received the call recordings because we wanted to see the alignment between what was in the discussion guide versus how these calls were actually going and see what was different, what was the same. And that gave us more opportunities to understand the actual behavior as it's happening rather than the ideal behavior as it's written in the call guide. And this is a very important part of a behavioral science approach, is always looking at as closely as you can, what is the actual behavior that's taking place so that you can make modifications that are based in the real world. We received 30 of those call recordings, all randomly selected at this appropriate part of the patient journey early on in this education process. So from there, we obviously looked at the call guide, made our recommendations there, but we were at the same time listening to all 30 of those call recordings and taking notes on what we were hearing in terms of what was working, what the patient experience seemed to be like, where there were missed opportunities for a good experience in general, also specifically for missed opportunities around getting patients to talk to their doctor about Watchman, right? Because that was our behavioral objective and the whole project was very grounded in that, and every recommendation always goes back to that very specific behavior. So listening to those call recordings was something that gave us a whole extra dimension when it came to making recommendations for that call guide, because we were seeing things that were happening that were not reflected in the guide just because might not be able to be written in a call guide. It's just part of a natural flow of conversation. And because these things are so subtle in the way that you phrase something as a question versus a statement, you might not necessarily see that in a call guide, but you see that as patterns when you listen to the actual recordings. So as we're listening to these calls and as we're looking at this call guide, we are using our behavioral science drivers of influence, which is our proprietary framework with our 21 drivers, our behavioral science techniques, and saying which one of these or which handful of these seems most relevant. And that was the guiding principle for the recommendations that we did end up making and that we always end up making at BVA Nudge, so that what we do is very robust and evidence-based. So the next step in this process is, once we have our recommendations from this audit, and we'll give you some specific examples here in a little bit, because I know that's the fun part. Once we have those recommendations, we have an interim meeting before the final presentation, because what's really important to us at BVA Nudge is that the recommendations that we give are useful and usable. Everybody agrees, I think, because we're here at the Human Advantage Conference, that behavioral science is very fun and very interesting and really fun to talk about and just fascinating. But it also needs to be useful for you in your real world. So we have that interim meeting as a double check to say, okay, in theory, ideally, in a perfect world, these are the things we would suggest that you do or change. Which of these are feasible for you? So we can knock out things that they just literally can't do for regulatory reasons, for practical reasons, whatever else, because there are always competing behavioral objectives in the real world. And so we can then refine our recommendations and present a final report. But that wasn't all. We also then got to do a 90-minute training of all of the patient education specialists. And we'll get more into what that looked like in a minute. But we wanted to make sure that not only are we just giving you, the leaders of the team, a new call guide, we want to make sure that the people who are actually delivering this intervention, which is what this is, were really equipped to do so effectively and we're on board with the process. So that was the initial engagement. From there, we've been very fortunate to have not one, but two opportunities for follow-up assessment. One was 3 months after the training of the patient education specialists, where we listened to a new batch of 30 call recordings to see, are they using the recommendations that we gave them and how's it going? And then most recently, we got to do roughly 1.5 year follow-up just before this conference. So we've got some really long-term implementation results to share with you later in this presentation, which is super exciting. And we're thrilled that Kate and Kim and everybody at the team was game for this sort of thing, because this is the science part of behavioral science, is the test and learn and refine and evaluate over a period of time. So we'll give you a little bit more information about the actual process of the audit, and then we'll get into some of the fun recommendations and outcomes. So as we mentioned, we examine all of the communications themselves, and we use our behavioral science framework, drivers of influence, to give them that long list, that interim list of optimizations. The final result is, in this case, we had 12 recommendations. Usually it's 8 to 10, but we were doing a little bit extra credit here because this was a really cool opportunity. And then we create that report at the end, giving very, very specific feedback on what is this recommendation, where is it used, what is the behavioral science behind it, how exactly should that look? So for the call guide in this case, which was the thing that we were actually giving feedback on, which was informed by our listening to the call recordings. That call guide, we literally took screenshots and we made notes on it and we mocked up what we would change and wrote new sentences, and it's very concrete and tactical so that it's super easy for Kate and Kim and the whole team to take away and implement. And so when it came to this output, you can see a sample there on the left, which was the output of the behavioral science audit, where we have, which drivers are we using, what is the hypothesis or the reason we're recommending it, giving examples of exactly what we're suggesting they do. And as I just described, you can see that screenshot there of the original call guide with some of our recommendations following. From there, as I mentioned, we didn't just give them a PowerPoint and say, good day. We also had the training with the patient education specialists. And so something that we did very deliberately in this training was we did not look at the call guide during the training. We did not show them, okay, here are the 12 optimizations we made. We'll take you through them and you can learn them in this training. Because what we knew from listening to the call recordings and speaking with the team is yes, this is a really experienced team. They've been doing this for a while. They're not necessarily looking at the call guide every minute of every call. They know what they're saying. They know what they're talking about. They have a lot of these conversations. This is a very capable team. And so it wouldn't be useful to then take them back to, oh, let's look at the call guide, right? We wanted to meet them where they were with the capability and the ways of working. And so we said, okay, also, we're not going to throw 12 new things at you in one training. That's too many. It's not an effective approach to learn. So we said, okay, we're going to distill all of these recommendations that we made that were very specific for the call guide, and we're going to distill them into 5 key principles for the training. And that's what the training is going to be on. So that was a very deliberate and purposeful choice. And it's something that I like to highlight here because it can be easy to assume that we just trained people on the PowerPoint deliverable essentially for the call guide recommendations, but that's not at all what happened. We really prioritize practicing what we preach and knowing how people learn and how people take in information and how to guide effective behavior change. And so we made sure to apply that to how we structured the training as well. So from here, I'm going to hand it off to Kim to tell you more about that. Whoop, nope, got to give you some recommendations first. So what we were training on, those 5 key things, I was excited. So the 5 key principles you'll see from our drivers of influence. These are the things that I think people find most interesting, right? Because it's the very specific part of, okay, but what did you change? What did you do? What was the behavioral science that was put into place here? So I'll take us through each of these. The first driver of influence that we said was going to be really important in this call guide and in this training and in this new way of engaging with patients at this part of their journey was easiness. So easiness tells us that we're a lot more likely to do something if it's clear, it's easy to understand, and there's not a lot of friction. I know there's been talk in earlier talks today about sludge, those things that are friction points in a process that hold us back from doing the behavior that we'd like people to do. So this can be as small as making people fill out a form before they receive information, right? That's a moment of sludge. And so when it comes to these call recordings and these call recommendations in the training, what we were suggesting is things like, it was 2 categories within easiness of specific execution. One was around health literacy. So health literacy is a whole field of how do you communicate health information in a way that people can understand and act on. And there's a lot of research and a lot of very specific scientific guidance on how to communicate health information effectively. And so for us, that was something that we included in the bucket of easiness because we were suggesting things like use more analogies when you explain Watchman so it's easy for people to understand. The other part of easiness was making it as easy as possible to keep patients in the funnel, to stay in relationship with them. So things like sending them the follow-up brochure, which is something that was already being done, sending it to them and phrasing it as a statement rather than a question. So what we were hearing in the original call recordings was more often, we have a patient brochure that we can send you. Would you like me to arrange that? What we recommended was a very small tweak. We said, make it a statement. Make it as easy as possible. Don't make them choose. Make it a default. So say, I will send you a patient brochure. What's your mailing address? Very subtle tweak, but you're going to get a lot more people receiving that brochure as a result, which means they're going to be more likely to have the information that they need to talk to their doctor about Watchman. So that was easiness. That was the first of the 5 principles that we did in the training with the patient education specialists. From there, we talked about norms. So norms, social norms, they tell us that we really want to fit in with the crowd. We want to follow what other people are doing. And we think that if a lot of other people are doing something, we should probably be doing it too. So this was a very simple but very powerful recommendation tweak. When we're talking about the benefits of Watchman, of which there are many, it's a really great, cool device. we just want to add something at the beginning, like instead of saying the benefits of Watchman are XYZ, just a small tweak, say patients who have Watchman really like XYZ benefits, or patients who chose to get Watchman got it for XYZ benefits. So that small tweak of just making it sound like other people like you like it for these reasons. The reasons are the same. That part hasn't changed, but we're just adding that extra layer of the social norms to make it more compelling and make it more relatable. The third principle that we shared in the training was salience. So salience is all about what are we drawing attention to? We like to pay attention to things that stand out, that are new, what seems relevant, and what is timed correctly based on where we are in our day, in our journey. So for here, this was around how do we present the benefits of Watchman, making sure we're presenting them in a fair and balanced way, always, of course, but making sure we're not overemphasizing anything that might cause hesitation. So, for example, the Watchman has only a 0.5% major complication rate, which is amazing. Super, super safe. We don't want to present that in a way where we're overly talking about the major complication rate for a really long period of time in the call, compared to talking about the many, many benefits, the 96% of patients who are able to get off blood thinners after using Watchman, etc. So it's about making sure we just present it accurately so we're not skewing attention too far negative while still presenting it in a fair and balanced way. Engagement is all around getting people to make a commitment ahead of time, because if we commit to something ahead of time, we're more likely to do it in the moment. So for this, it was quite specific. It was around at the end of the call, patient education specialists, we wanted them to very consistently set a time where they were going to make a follow-up call to the patient. And so we said, okay, instead of asking again, saying, oh, we'll call you later, something like that, we would like them to say, I will call you after your next cardiologist appointment. Okay. And then wait for the patient to say, okay. That moment of getting them to opt in a sense, without just passively hearing that you're going to call them, means they're more likely to stay in the funnel at all. And they're also more likely to pick up the phone when they call, because this is another challenge that's very real when you're talking about call center, because you need patients to pick up the phone in the first place. So if they have actively accepted and committed to taking your call, they're more likely to actually have that conversation with you when the time comes. And then finally, the last recommendation that we made, which was a little bit more conceptual, a little bit more structural, it's called one step at a time. So this is important because it's all around breaking down larger behaviors into smaller sub-behaviors, making it really clear and achievable and easy, and we're more likely to follow through. And getting a patient to ask their doctor about Watchman is quite a complex behavior if you think about it. There's a lot that goes into it. So we want to make sure that we break this down. So when it comes to the calls and how this is relevant to the calls, what we were hearing in the original recordings was more often patient education specialists launching into the education that they're doing, which is very important, without giving patients any kind of signposting. And so for patients who've never heard this information before, this is all new, they're probably not in the medical field, more often than not, it feels like a lot. It's a little bit overwhelming without knowing what you're being given. So we recommended things like at the beginning of the call, or wherever in the call you start doing the education portion of the conversation, tell patients what you're going to do. This is a classic teaching methodology. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them, recap. And people are more likely to retain it. And so we said, just at the beginning, right before, just add another sentence. Say, I'm going to tell you about the device, the procedure, and then you can ask me any questions you have. That simple signposting will help people understand, okay, I'm about to receive education and I'm going to mentally put it in these 3 buckets. I'm ready. So that was the 1 step at a time recommendation.
We were trained on the top 5 drivers of influence that were identified for our program. The training was specifically designed using behavioral science and adult learning principles, featuring the clear purpose and benefit of using these methods, which definitely gained associate buy-in. Repetition of key takeaways, again, telling them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, then of course tell them what you're going or what you've told them. By providing interactive exercises, discussion on how to apply the drivers of influence to past experience, or having them create their own realistic examples. And we use humor and pre-commitment as well. The team has responded very well to the training, and it really helps to drive home how we can best help our patients. It brings it full circle with the things that we educate them on clinically, as well as, you know, the nuances of how we speak and the verbiage that we use. On the next slide, you will see some examples of how our program is presenting these drivers of influence or nudges during actual patient calls. Under the easiness category, you can see an example of call verbiage on the simple explanation of the procedure and device. This is especially helpful on calls where the patient doesn't know about the Watchman. For instance, if their physician has directed them to research the Watchman, we can provide information and answer questions. Another use of the easiness nudge is reviewing the Watchman website features and explaining to patients where to find the different features, like the animated video or the patient testimonials. Under the norms category, here's an example of a call where the patient education specialist is explaining how patients use the personalized doctor discussion guide, which can lead patients to feeling empowered. Norms is also a great talking point in which to bring up questions we've brainstormed with other patients. For example, how to ask the physician about complications. We use norms frequently for patients that want to know about the side effects of the procedure, sharing with them what other patients typically report are the main side effects of the procedure for them. Under the engagement category, this is a call where we specifically talk about the follow-up call, setting the expectation that the patient education specialist follows the patient throughout their entire Watchman journey. For engagement, the team will actually start the call, letting the patient know that we're following up on the health assessment they completed online, and that they will be discussing the Watchman procedure, as well as asking them a few additional questions. This sets the expectations of the call. And we frequently have patients write down questions for the doctor during our phone conversations, which keeps them actively engaged in the call as well. Some additional examples of other principles used or other nudges are salience. And as Suzanne mentioned, we give the patients information on the success of the Watchman. That has been an effective method, letting them know that the Watchman has a 98.8% success rate. For the one step at a time, if needed, we can actually assist the patients in the first step, which is completing their initial assessment on the Watchman website, which then will generate that personalized doctor discussion guide. And oftentimes patients aren't sure of which physician to speak to about the Watchman, so we can direct them to the appropriate doctor for their next step, either the cardiologist or the Watchman implanter. And on the next slide.
No, sorry, I'm sorry to stop this very, very interesting conversation, but we have the timing problem, and we have to pass to question and answer part of the last part of our roundtable. I'm really very sorry to ask you to
just a
stop the
couple of
presentation.
slides left, Gotti. We have just a couple slides with the final results.
Okay.
So we can go quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Kim.
Boston Scientific has done several things to reinforce the behavioral science training, including updating the call handling guide, using drivers of influence cards, focusing on a nudge of the week, creating a nudge champion on the team, and building in onboarding training. And we do this as a constant touch point for the patient education team with check-ins during the week done through Teams apps. Discussions during weekly team meetings occur with the specialists, giving examples of conversations. And of course, we review the nudges in the biweekly one-on-one meetings with each patient education specialist. And Suzanne, I'll turn it back over to you for the next slide.
Excellent. And the one thing we didn't have on that last slide is that Kim is the official nudge queen at the Watchman Care team, which has made, I think, all the difference having a wonderful champion like her. So for the last couple of slides, we're just going to share the results of the follow-up evaluations. So as we mentioned, we did these 3 months after the training and about 1.5 years after the training, where we were listening for those 5 drivers of influence, whether they were being used and whether there were missed opportunities. And so you can see here, to orient you to this slide, the bottom rectangle where it says baseline on the left, that was the initial call listening that we did before recommendations and training. The middle bar is from the 3-month follow-up, and the top bar is from the 1.5-year follow-up. And as you can see, the trend for all 5 of the drivers is moving in the direction of being used more and more and more consistently. So it's been really wonderful to see that sustained implementation, which is really so impressive. As we all know, long-term behavior change is the most challenging. And so it really speaks to all of the work that Boston Scientific and the Watchman Care team have done to make this part of their way of working and their team norms. And you can see that this kind of change is possible when you do have those little reinforcements throughout the week and throughout the team socially.
Yep, exactly. So further kind of long-term results, I'll kind of wrap with this in the next slide, but we continue to monitor with patient satisfaction surveys, and we see that 92% are likely to have a conversation with their doctor after they have a conversation with us. And we also have put this into our call quality monitoring. So the exact nudges are actually a part of how we score the calls and continue to improve and make sure the team is utilizing this. And we actually know that patients are 3 times more likely to get a Watchman implant after they interact with programs like the call center. So with that, our key takeaways today, again, were how we've really brought the nudges and behavioral science principles to our calls every day. And we implemented that through our updated call guide and our training. And we really have made this part of a regular team discussion and processes, as Kim talked about. And then the follow-up audit that Suzanne discussed will really allow us to continue to improve our educations with patients, encourage them to talk to their doctor about Watchman, and we're already seeing that success through our patient surveys and our implant conversion rates. And with that, I'll open it up for Q&A.
Yes, thanks a lot. Coming back to the question and answer, I have unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to discuss, but in any case, I have a general question for everybody. What do you see, considering also this case, very interesting, what do you see as the future of behavioral science in healthcare, generally speaking? It's a question for Suzanne, for Kim, for Kate.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the healthcare.
Yeah, very good question. I think, generally speaking, and for our specific work, I'd like to continue to partner with physicians on how they educate patients, because obviously we're just one piece of how we talk to patients and help them understand. So I'd love to see more partnerships with our physician and our customers who are obviously talking to way more patients than we are, and help them understand some of these principles and how we can continue to educate patients in different ways.
Thanks a lot. Kim, Suzanne?
Sure, I'll go. So in terms of behavioral science and healthcare, I think it's something that's going to need to just be increasingly incorporated into the air we breathe, because this is something that there's so much evidence behind it being helpful when used correctly. And when it comes to healthcare, this is one of the most important things that you can try to do behavior change in, right? Saving lives, improving quality of life. There's very few things that are more worthwhile to work on. And so I think it's going to increasingly need to become part of everything that every pharma biotech device company uses in all of their communications, in understanding how their entire ecosystem is structured and comes across. And I think ideally, similar to what Kate was saying, I would love to see more people, patients, physicians, other healthcare providers, and folks in the ecosystem on the ground starting to have some awareness to basically be more informed consumers and providers.
Thanks a lot. Coming back to the Watchman case, how have you been so successful in keeping these behavioral science principles top of mind for the team? The magic word is how.
I think
this is for Kim and Kate. Okay, Kim. Okay.
Yeah, we have the nudge champion on the team, which is me. And I frequently bring examples of how the principles or nudges are being used during real-time patient interactions. And the team also does that. They'll put in the team's chat, you know, hey, I just had a great example of norms, or I use the easiness nudge. And I think the other thing is that the call handling guide is utilized for specific verbiage on the nudges. So we've always got that top of mind that the nudges are there. And of course, we do follow up with the associates and the patient education specialists to let them explain how they're using the nudges and bring it to their attention.
Thanks a lot. So the consequent question is, where will you go from here with behavioral science?
Well, we're very excited about the latest, audit that Suzanne and team have done, because now we're going to have additional principles to train the team on. We're in the midst of doing that right now, such as value and framing and emotion. So really excited about the continued learning, the continued exploration of additional ways that we can educate patients and continue to help them have a conversation with their doctor about Watchman.
Thanks a lot. Suzanne, do you want to close this roundtable? We have 1 minute.
Perfectly on time. Well done, team. Yes, so I want to thank all of you who are watching at home or live or the recording after the fact. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed learning about how behavioral science can be used in a very specific way in the healthcare space. I want to say big thanks to Kate and Kim for being willing to not only share this content at all, but to be here live with us today. This is really wonderful, and we're so proud and grateful for this partnership. And thank you, Gadi, for hosting us as the moderator, and all of those who have done amazing work of organizing this conference.
So thanks a lot to everybody, and how to say, see you in the next roundtable. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Ciao, Ted.
Ciao. I think that's a really great case study to kind of lead to our final session. I like how what Suzanne did with the Boston Scientific team, rather than kind of hitting them with a barrage of science, right? We know there's over 200 heuristics and biases. They've really taken their time to say, let's learn 5, let's apply 5 to a very specific case. And now you can see as that relationship builds forward, they're going to add more of our drivers of influence. They're going to train the team on more heuristics and apply them to the business.